Hey, it's Luca from EDMProd. Drum programming is often one of those challenging topics for learning producers, so this video is going to dive into the how and also the why of what makes really solid and professional sounding house drums. If you're looking to dive even deeper into the world of drum programming, head over to the EDMProd website and check out our Drums by Design course. It covers a wide range of genres and techniques which will help you reach that next step in your drum programming. As always, the link's in the description. So, asking the question, what makes a house drum loop? Well, firstly, I'm just going to outline what goes into a fully completed house drum loop and then talk about each category, how to make them, and why they're important. So the fundamentals, it wouldn't be house without the kick, the clap, and the hi-hat. This is the backbone of our drums, and we're going to be talking about the spots they sit, what this actually does, and the implications that they have on the groove for the rest of the drums. The percussion is where all the groove and feel comes from in our house drums. They make the loop more dynamic and flowing. So now we've got a bit of push and pull in our drum loop. The 16ths, things like hats and shakers are really important drivers of energy in our drum loop. And finally, for that professional sounding touch, we need depth and texture in our drums. These elements are more subtle, but they help the loop feel more 3D and less flat. Listen out for the texture in the background and these reverbed hits here. To learn about house music, it's also useful to know about the origins of where it came from, and the TR-909 is exactly that. This machine is so fundamental to house music. As learning producers, sometimes it's difficult to know exactly what sounds to put into house music. So here, the TR-909 is a great reference point for that. We've got, a kick drum, we've got a really nice clap and an open hat, which is fundamental to house. But we also have things like percussive elements like closed hats, rim shots are great to use, snare drums, we've got toms and rides and crashes, which we'll be talking about as well. I'm not necessarily saying you have to use these sounds, but they are a great reference point to what types of percussion sounds we can put into house music. So let's jump into a new session and start making these drums from scratch. So I'm in a new live set now. The first thing I'm going to do is just go over to the tempo slider and I'm going to select my tempo as being 128. House music sits anywhere in the 120 zone, but 128 is a classic house tempo. What I'm going to do is just group this MIDI track here and label this drums and make 2 more MIDI tracks. So 3 in total, and label these kick, clap, and open hi-hat. Before we start to put in MIDI notes, it's good to know a little bit about our grid. These numbers here, 5, 6, 7, 8, they denote bars. Each number is 1 bar. And as we zoom in, you'll see that these other numbers pop up and they are quarters of a bar. So if I select my grid and put it onto quarters, you can see that each number is a quarter. So 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, these are quarters. That's really handy for house because we know that kick drums sit on quarter notes. So let's go grab some sounds for our kick, clap, and hi-hat and then start putting in some notes. Okay, so now I have a kick, it sounds like this. I have a clap that sounds like this. I might just turn the sustain down on that. And I have an open hat that sounds like this. All pretty basic house sounds. First of all, I'm going to make a MIDI clip and put 1 kick drum on each quarter note like we just said. So I'm just going to make this first one, highlight this section, and then hit Command D to duplicate this kick along. And then I'm going to extend out this MIDI clip and it'll be all the way along on our quarter notes, which is great. Next, we need to put our claps in and they sit on every second kick drum. So I'm going to make 1 MIDI note here and then just highlight this section and then duplicate it over, and then that will be good for our clap. Lastly, we have an open hat. These sit on 8th notes. They are in the same frequency as the kick drum, but just every second 8th note rather than on the quarter note at the start. So they just sit in between each kick drum. So let's extend those out and have a listen to our loop so far. So now would be a good time to introduce to you the 16th note grid. Let's select the 16th note grid and have a look in here. So before we were talking about 5 and 6, this is 1 bar and they are split into quarters where each kick sits on. The 16th note grid splits those quarters into 4 different parts. So let's just look at each quarter and the 16th notes within that quarter. The first 16th note of each quarter has a kick drum on it, right? And then the first 16th note of the next quarter also has a kick drum on it as well. The second doesn't have anything on it. The third one has an open hat on it. The fourth one doesn't have anything on it as well. So take note of these 2 spots here which don't have anything on it. The drums here are like our skeleton backbone to the house music track, and these 2 spots here are what I call the groove spots. So what you put in these 2 spots here all the way along, so any of these spots all the way along, is where all the groove comes from in house music. This makes our job as a producer a lot more fun and also a lot more simple, because all we need to do is just throw some percussion sounds in these spots wherever you want. Just experiment with which spots you want to hit, and you'll start to build up some groove in your loop. So let's start putting in some percussion in these spots and see how it goes. Well, I've just found this snare sound and it sounds like this. Classic sort of snappy house snare sound, and I'm just going to put it in a few groove spots that we were just talking about along this 16th note grid. So let's first of all try out this spot, put a note in here and have a listen to that. You can experiment around and see how each spot feels different. But what I want to do here is I actually want to move these notes over and put them here and here. This is a classic house spot. It sort of surrounds this third kick drum. So there's one just before and one just after. This one sort of pulls you in towards this kick drum, and this one just has another extra little bit of groove after the kick drum. So let's have a listen to that and see how that sounds. What you can do is I'm just going to highlight here and hit Command J to join these clips together. I'm going to double click on this clip and then go in here and click loop. So the loop is on. I'm going to extend these out. And so far this is all well and good, but what we need in house is actually swing. So I'm going to go over to the groove section down here and just click this hotspot groove button and scroll down and look for something with 16ths. So swing logic 16ths. 16ths is what we want. And I think I'm going to go for something like 62 here. So I'm just going to double click this and we can see it's in our groove pool here. Once it's in the groove pool here, we can just go select it down here. So once we select this, what it's actually doing, it's not showing us here, but what it's doing is it's moving these MIDI notes slightly to the right off the 16th note grid, slightly to the right. So it's going to be doing that without showing us. The benefit of this is we don't have to actually move them over. It's just doing it for us. Now, once we play it, you can hear that these will be slightly swung. Great. So that's the start of our percussion. I'm just going to group this and into a percussion group. And I'm going to add another snare that has a slightly different tone in a different spot. Great. So I've just found this loop and I like the snare right at the start of the loop. It's kind of like lo-fi and crunched. So I'm just going to pull this loop onto this clip and take out the start. I'm just going to shorten up this start marker and then bring the sustain down and it will sound like this. I'm then going to make a clip. I think I'm going to make it on this side because I want this snare to be looping on a longer loop length than this one. So this will be looping every 2 bars while this is looping every 1 bar. And I think I want to place it. Let's have a look and click some of these 16th notes and see what works. So this doesn't work because it's layered on top of the other snare. We remember this one is layered on top of that snare as well. So maybe I can put it here instead. And just before I do this as well, I'm going to turn the groove on, making sure it's the same groove that we used last time as well. Great. I'm going to select this region, hit Command J to join it, loop it, and extend out this loop all the way across. So I just went and found this percussion loop in the browser. Percussion loops are great because in Ableton we can use the slice mode to trigger each transient separately. So I'm going to make a MIDI clip and do the same thing and sort of experiment with the 16th note grid and hitting these groove spots. So first I'm going to turn the groove on. Remember, every second 16th note is a groove spot. So let's experiment with these spots, triggering these samples in these spots. So after a bit of experimenting, I've got a nice little groove here that I'm liking. Just using these 16th notes, I've actually placed one bongo hit right on an open hat as well. That's okay because the bongo hit sounds different to the open hat, so they layer nicely. And I think it sounds nice. We can just experiment with some velocity changes as well. It doesn't have to be too specific. We can just sort of drag these around and it gives it a nice little feel as well. So now the percussion has given the track a bit more groove and feel. Let's look at adding some 16th notes. And by 16ths, I mean like more or less a constant 16th note, like something like a shaker or some closed hi-hats. First of all, maybe let's use some closed 909 hi-hats. So I've pulled in a closed 909 hi-hat and then just pulled down the decay a little bit and it sounds like this. Let's make a MIDI clip and place the hi-hat on some 16th note spots. So one thing to note about the closed hi-hat, we already have an open 909 hi-hat in our track, and that is on the third 16th note. So if I could put them on all the 16th notes, but I'm actually going to take it off the third one because we already have the same sound on this one, and we don't want to layer the same sounds, remember. What I'm going to do is actually just mess with the velocity a little bit on these three notes, because then when I duplicate them across, it'll also duplicate the velocity. If you want to make some slight variations, change the velocity a little bit more on these three, and then we can duplicate them across again. Remember, we need the groove in there, so let's turn the groove on. And that's a bit better. Turn it up a bit. So this is providing a little bit more energy, but it's still a little bit static. So let's layer it with some other 16th notes and keep going. So I found another drum loop here and I've just done the same thing with the slice function. The drum loop sounds like this. There's a few good little hat sounds in there that I want to use. So let's click this MIDI clip and plug in some notes. Again, I'm on the 16th note grid and I'm just going to put in a note on each 16th note here and then duplicate them across. So maybe one here, one here. I like the way that sounds. I'm going to duplicate these ones. And I think I'm going to turn down the velocity, holding command of these ones. And maybe because this last one is an open hat as well. We have an open hat here already from up here. So I'm going to turn this one down here because we're going to be doubling up open hats, which is a nice vibe. I'm going to turn this one down and then maybe keep this one a little bit louder, but also turn it down. These ones can come up a bit maybe. Finally, I'm just going to duplicate these as well. And then let's have a listen in the context. So now the 16th notes are sounding like this. They've got a really nice groove coming to them now. I like the feel of layering 16th notes together. So the hats have a few different tones going on and they're sort of moving at different times and they accumulate together to make this really nice moving sort of groove. Just a last little example of other things you can do to create 16th notes is shakers is a really good way of doing 16th notes. You can use 16th note shaker loops, but sometimes it's hard to get them to fit with your track because the swing has to be the same, remember? So I'm double clicking on this and the groove I've selected in here. It's also worth noting that each one of these samples, I've actually just chopped the start off, so that the sample actually starts when I click play on the MIDI note. Something like this, it has a really long introduction to the sound so that the transient is actually going to be slightly delayed. I don't want the transient to be delayed, so I just move that start head back a little bit. And I'm going to double click in here and then just get my draw pencil tool out and sort of just play some notes. Maybe like this. I'm sort of just clicking around. There's no real rhyme or reason. I want it to be a little bit random. So I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to play with the velocity sliders. Maybe I want it to come up here and then go down and then sort of jump around a bit and then go down and then up. I'm just sort of more or less doing this randomly. And it creates this sort of effect. And that layering with our other 16th notes, I think it'll glue it together nicely and it'll give it a nice cohesive feel. Sort of softens it off a bit and rounds it out as well. And then with the rest of our drums, so those 16ths are sounding nice. Let's just add some depth as a final last touch. Okay, well, I'm going to add some textures in here. I've got these little textures. This is actually from an Ableton pack. They sound like these. There's so many ways to do this. I'm doing it in MIDI, but you can also do it in audio. Do stuff like this where drag it in and then sort of chop sections out and like sort of repeat them and reverse them and duplicate them and sort of just get creative with how you're using and creating your textures. But what I'm going to do here is I've actually just chopped these two onto some drum pads in a drum rack, and then I'm going to play some notes and trigger them. So let's put a MIDI clip in and let's see how we're going to trigger these. So maybe make a note like this. And then I think I'm just going to create 2 notes on this one. And what I've actually done here as well is on each of the samples, I've gone into the control section and put a filter on each one. And then I've also used this pan here, and I've panned this one slightly to the right, and I've panned this one slightly to the left. And so when it plays this loop, it's adding this texture in the background, but it's also adding width in the stereo spectrum as well. So let's turn this up and have a listen. You can see how that's panning around, and this is going to do a really good job of adding that subtle texture in the background. The next thing I'm going to do is add a ride. Ride in house music is a great element to build to. It's a great thing to add on something like a drop or something where you want that full energy peak. So let's use a 909 ride because they sound great, and I'll show you how to program it in as well. So I'm just going to search for 909 ride, go all results, and just select this one. Drag this in, and all I'm literally going to do is go into our MIDI notes and select 8th notes. So remember, we had our open hats on this second 8th note, which is also the third 16th note, right? So our open hats were sitting on 8th notes. Rides are really good layering with open hats, but instead of just layering them like this, what I'm actually going to do is select all of them, hold Option and drag it to the left, and that's going to duplicate all of them as well. And whilst they're still highlighted, I'm just going to pull down the velocity of these. And what this does is it layers with the open hat, but it also creates this really nice bouncing effect, which is classic to house music. And let's have a listen to that with the rest of the drums. So the ride is adding a lot of energy. It's also providing a nice amount of space and this sort of bit of ambience in the background because we have it a bit lower, and it just provides that nice amount of space and depth that we're looking for. Next, let's just add a few percussive details that are just going to sit in the background, and I'm going to put a bit of reverb on them, and they're just going to add a really nice amount of depth as well. To find these little percussive hits, it's sometimes nice to just search in something like perc loop, and just chopping loops is a great way of doing this. So I've found these 2 little drum fills here. This first one sounds like this, and the second one. And these are going to be great for what we're looking for here. I think I just want to use this one hit here. And so I'm just going to chop off that, chopping off the transient as well a bit, which is fine. This is just going to be an element in the background, remember. I also like this little reverby reverse hit that it has built into the sample as well. I am looking for a place to place it. We have our first 4 bars of drums here, and then our second 4 bars of drums here. I think I'm just going to place it right before it goes into the second 4 bars. So let's place it maybe on this last kick drum here, and let's turn it down, the track down, and put some reverb on it as well. So I've got a send ready here to go, and I'm just going to send this track into this reverb and just add a little bit of reverb on it. So now it's a little bit quieter and in the background. Let's listen to it in context. I think that sounds good. I'm just going to do the same thing here with this other drum loop. I think I just want, in fact, I'm going to take each one of these transients and sort of just chop it out a bit. I'm going to put it onto 16th notes so it's a little bit easier to see. Let's put this one here, and I'm going to place this one here. Remember, when we're using audio, we have to swing manually. So each of these groove spots, remember in the 16th note grid, that's the second and fourth one. So this second one needs to be moved slightly to the right to actually swing it. And this third one needs to be on the grid so it doesn't swing. And then this fourth one needs to be swung. You can see this percussive hit already has swing built into it. So let's just have a listen and see how that goes. That sounds great, but I think I want to move this hit to this kick drum instead and have a listen to that. I think it just provides a little bit more space and it's nice. So now I've just duplicated it over to here as well. And then in this one, I've just transposed this last hit down 2 semitones as well. It just creates a nice little bit of variation between these hits. And now these hits are working nicely. I think they sound great. So adding this bit of space with these percussive details is really nice for our drum loop. Finally, the last thing I've done to round this off is just pulled in this white noise delay effects. I just typed in effects in my browser and found this sound by doing that. And I've just sent it a little bit to the reverb, turned it down a bit, and just placed it at the start of this bar. And this, it really signifies the start of the 8-bar loop. So this sound here actually makes this whole loop feel like an 8-bar loop rather than a 4-bar loop if it was not there. So what this is doing is like a concept that I call extending the loop. And when we put things like this that are repeating less often, it makes the loop feel longer to us and less repetitive, which is great because in house music, we need that structure that the repetitive elements provide, but we also want to trickle in some less repetitive, longer loop length elements to make the loop feel longer. And we've been doing this the whole way through. We've been extending the loop by doing this. By putting this in, looping every 4 bars, it made it feel like a 4-bar loop. By adding some percussive details in every now and then, every 2 bars, this extends the loop as well. So we want to do this in multiple different elements, but something like this is really obvious and great way of doing it as well. So with this effect in here, I think it adds a nice amount of depth and it sort of rounds off our loop nicely. So now I'm just going to trigger this bass line to come on and let's have a listen to it all together. So now the drum loop is sounding nice. I think we have enough elements here to create a full track with if we wanted to. And just to recap, we started with our fundamentals, our skeleton, our backbone of the house track, which is the kick, clap, and open hi-hat. And they just created this foundation, and we described the 16th note grid while using this. The kick drum separates the loop into quarters, and the open hat plays off every 8th note, which is just after the kick drum. And then there's these 2 groove spots between the skeleton that haven't been hit. And we need to hit those spots with percussion. So we've provided some percussion in here, which is really exemplifying those grooves by hitting those groove spots. Remember, we've added swing to all of our percussion. Then we added some 16th notes, layering hats and shakers together to create this rhythmic groove. It also does a really good job of gluing the loop together. Finally, we've added some depth for our drums to stand out and feel like they're a bit more 3D, less flat. So we added a texture in here, some ride for some space and width, a few little reverb hits, and then an effect just at the start here as well. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you've learned something about house drums. They're actually a lot of fun to make and really easy to do if you know the guidelines. Remember to leave a like or subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the video today. I know I really enjoyed making this one. So thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.